So I asked David, how do you want me to introduce you? And, do you want me to use some of your bio and some of the things you've done? And he said, no, just speak from your heart and tell them who I am. And that's so him, right? Because I noticed over the years that when people would come up and meet David and they would ask what he did, he would say, I'm a glad helper. And initially people would go, and I said after a while, you need to tell him what you mean by that, by that, honey. But he wasn't talking about what he did. He was talking about who he was. And the Glad Helpers, for those of you who don't know, was the original prayer group that Edgar Cayce started here in Virginia Beach. And he's been a member of that for a very, very long time. And that's where his heart is. And he believes in the power of prayer. And he is the most dedicated, disciplined with his spiritual disciplines of anyone that I've ever seen. One day I offered, he does affirmations every single day, sometimes more than once a day, but they're really, really long, and I offered one day to type them up for him. I said, oh, honey, I can type those up for you. And we sat down, and it was 5 pages of affirmations with all these adjectives, and he thinks about everything so clearly about how he wants to say something when he's praying, right? When he is affirming. And I just couldn't believe that he could remember all that every day and say that on numerous occasions. So I'm really impressed with that, honey. He's definitely, basically, in everything he does, service to others. In every minuscule little thing and the way he treats people. And he is a master reframer of thought and words that come out of his mouth, my mouth. He can turn within seconds, find the positive thing in whatever that was said and turn it around. I mean, it's kind of amazing. Sometimes, I'll say something and he'll give me the positive side of that, and I'll go, okay, honey, just give me a minute. I'm not there yet. but he's already there, right? I used to laugh that he thanks everybody everywhere we go. When we go to restaurants, he thanks everybody. He thanks the person that sits us down. He thanks the waitress. He thanks the busboys. He thanks the people sitting at the next table for having a great conversation. I mean, he just thanks everyone. And I always laugh that if you stepped on his toe, he would thank you for stepping on his toe and say, thank you for telling me where not to put my foot next time. And I'm not kidding, right? People have said to me, is he for real? Is he really that positive? And I say, yeah, he really is. It's kind of amazing. He loves people, and he will talk to people everywhere, grocery store, parking lots, everywhere. And I always picture them coming home and going, I had the most unusual conversation with this stranger today, because he will tell you anything. He has the biggest, kindest heart of anyone that I know, and he's able to burst into song also in parking lots and in the grocery store and anywhere we go. And I'm sure I will be very surprised what he says today, because whenever he speaks, he's speaking where Spirit takes him, and this is the fellowship. And anything can happen, right? So please welcome David Riblet.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being here. And I'd like you to look around and look at the people who are here. Edgar Cayce said that nobody we meet as a stranger. We've known them in another life. And what would those lives be? Well, what I'm going to talk about today is going to go through a lot of different eras, including the gospel of the beloved companion, go touch on ascended masters, go touch on pre-birth planning, going to touch a lot of places. So first of all, I'm just really blessed to have you all here, because I asked that the people who would come today would be people that would get something useful out of what I said. I don't care what it is, and I don't ever have to know. But I expect that you've come here today to hear what I share, and I've come here today to share what would be helpful to you. So whatever that is a blessing. So I'm going to honor the fellowship first. I'm going to jump back to the time before Jesus. And the reason I'm honoring the fellowship first is the founder of this church is Paul Solomon. And Paul Solomon had an affinity with Paul of Tarsus. Now, the Gnosis in the law book mentions that Paul of Tarsus was actually the archangel Hilarion. And Hilarion was actually the Jehanne, which is the leader of the Fourth Ray. And so that's the 2,000-year period before Jesus and Mary Magdalene, which I will talk about shortly. But interestingly enough, Archangel Hilarion didn't just lead that 2,000 years. He turned up again, and he turned up as Paul of Tarsus. And Paul was going down the road to Damascus, and he used to persecute Christians, and he had a conversion. And after that, he was spreading Christianity because he was trained, he could speak Greek, and to spread Christianity, it helped that there was someone who was advocating it around the world. And because he could speak Greek, he reached a lot of the world that maybe some of the other people involved with the early movement of Christianity wouldn't be able to reach. Now, the time of Jesus, I call Jesus a friend. I was in that time. I was in the scene. So was my mom. So was my dad. So was my brother, but not my sister. I don't know how that happened. But the Essenes were a small group of, they actually prepared the way for Jesus to come in and be born by Mary. And I think it was something like 300 years that they actually prepared for Jesus to come in and be the one that was going to do the next major task in this world. And so we went from Archangel Hilarion, where Judaism was the primary source of spirituality, and at least in the world that was around that portion of the world. We have the Far East, and they have their own history and their own spiritual avatars and leaders. But Jesus came in, and actually Mary, from my understanding, Mother Mary, actually trained with a lot of other young girls to be that one who would be able to hold the energy of Jesus. And that went on for 300 years. Different girls, different, all holding that this spiritual being that was going to make a difference in this world would come in. So when Jesus Mother Mary was actually picked by Archangel Gabriel as the one that was going to be the mother of Jesus. And so a few years later, up comes Jesus. This is where Pambro comes in, because Pambro actually spoke to us recently here at the fellowship on Absaphar, who is the innkeeper's daughter at the manger where Jesus was born. So again, look around. We have a lot of friends here. We have a lot of people we knew from other lives. And we have a lot of people we're going to know as long as this earth continues, because we are all here to serve. We have a lot of people we'll serve with in other lives as well. So Mary Magdalene was one of the volunteers, and I'll say it that way, because the Gnosis of the law gets into who Jesus was. And Jesus was someone who had gone through a lot of lifetimes and a lot of training. And he was the one that could do the task of holding unconditional love. And he could come here and he could go through, and he knew this ahead of time, he could go through the crucifixion, and he could go through the resurrection, and he could go through the ascension. And so there were a lot of volunteers for that position. Don't think I was one of them. That was a pretty big task. And so Lord Maitreya, who was also an ascended master, actually picked out of all the volunteers, and he picked Jesus to be the one to come and do this task for us. And then Jesus got to create how he was going to do it, and he also got to pick who was going to come to serve with him. And so there were 36 volunteers for the disciples, and he picked 12 of them. And these were, but when we think about it, think of how many higher beings would want to come in at a time on earth where a major spiritual change is going to go on. So that's what happened. There were so many angels and ascended masters and other light beings that came in to serve with Jesus to do this task for humanity. So one of them was Mary Magdalene. So one way to look at this is, did she just show up and have her experience, and Jesus turned to everybody and said, "This, who can speak ill of this woman?" Who they were going to hold accountable for something that who even knows what she really did or didn't do. Somebody could have just decided they had a grudge, had a problem with her. I mean, who knows? As you look at history, do the stories we hear, are they really the truth? We know in our heart what's true. So I think what I want you today is to look in your heart and see what you feel true about what I say. But I'm going to back up a little bit further, too, and talk about some of the glad helpers. And there's some glad helpers here from the Casey Spiritual Community. And there were actually a few people, probably more than a few people, who volunteered to come in with Jesus. Do you remember the story of the blind man? And Jesus was asked, who sinned? Was it the man or was it his parents? And Jesus said, neither. Because what were people doing? They were judging. The blind man was actually one of the original Glad Helper reading that was given in 1931. And so some of the stories that come through the Casey readings they go back to some pretty interesting stuff. Ruth Lenore, who was actually the Glad Helper treasurer for a while, she was actually invited by Casey in 1932 to join the group. The group started in 1931. Ruth Lenore was a woman who touched Jesus's robe, and the virtue was drained out of it. And Jesus felt it and asked who that was. Well, later she was the treasurer of the Glad Helpers for very many years. When people called into AA for prayer for themselves or for other people who needed help, they got Ruth Lenore. And I was actually blessed when I was membership manager there for 20 months. I was blessed to be in the office that was Ruth Lenore's. So talk about a vibrational connection. Okay, so let's talk about Mary Magdalene. Would it surprise you if I said that Mary Magdalene was also one of the people that was in the Glad Helpers? Doesn't surprise me. She was actually Mildred Davis, who was Gladys Davis's sister. Right now, I am in Gladys Davis's office, serving as the Glad Helper representative for ARE. So look at how lives, look at connections, look at the service we do. And really, this is one of the things I want to focus on with Mary Magdalene. She came in to serve. She was not somebody that just one day something happened and all of a sudden somebody accused her, and they were going to hold her accountable. Well, what did Jesus do? He actually turned to each one of the people that were there to hold her accountable, and he wrote something and showed it to them. And did anybody accuse her of sinning? Did anybody still want to hold her accountable? No, they left. Because when they actually looked at themselves, at the mirror of what he wrote in front of them, there was nothing they could say about Mary Magdalene. So when Cheryl introduced me, she said, I speak from my heart, and I do. And I'm going to draw a small distinction here of the people who were around Jesus. Because the people who came around Jesus, his message spoke to them. They came from all walks of life. They were male, they were female. Jesus then showed them, as the Gospel of the Beloved Companion book talks about, the author, and forgive me for the pronunciation here, Jehanne de Quillan. I'm only going to say that once, and if I mispronounced it, I apologize. I understand actually she was at the Unity Church in Chesapeake. I would have loved to have seen her in person. But their community actually received the book from Alexandria, probably in the middle of the 1st century. When I say book, the teachings, the testimony that is in this book was moved to France in the 12th, around the middle of the 1st century, to Languedoc. And it was in Greek. Then at one point it got written in Occitan, which is part of that part of France. It was called Language d'Oc, and it was written in Occitan, and then it was translated out again. And this is, of course, in English. It might be in other languages, but anybody who gets this book. Cheryl actually heard about this book at, she ran into it at the ARE and got it. And then she brought it home, and we were on New Year's Day a few years ago, and somebody started speaking about this book. And the whole party, they kept talking about this book. Well, Cheryl read it, then I read it. I've read it a couple times. It speaks to me because it's true. And when I read a book, I read with my discernment to see what the message is. This book is true. And the author actually refers to it as being the living testimony of Jesus. So Mary Magdalene came in, and she was able to hear what Jesus was sharing with people. She was able to hear it in what he was actually saying from his heart. And I believe what Mary Magdalene experienced was she used her heart's eye to discern what was true and what wasn't true, which culminated in her, in another life, well, let's just say it culminated in the community having the information, and then in 2010, she actually published the book, which talks about a lot of the experiences that the other Gospels talk about, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But it's got a different flavor to it. And it's got a flavor that resonates more to me. I feel like it was someone who heard it from a different angle. And so why did it speak to me? I think it spoke to me because I had been in that life with Jesus, and I'd heard those words. And there's no way I was in that life with Jesus without also meeting Mary Magdalene. And those of you who have had lives with Jesus quite well might know Mary Magdalene and Jesus and many of the other people that were in that experience. So what was the message? Well, let's just say I believe Jesus' message was unconditional love. And I think when we use our higher vibrations of love, which is, as I look back at the Old Testament, there was a lot of fear in the Old Testament. There was a lot of fear when Jesus came in and Mary Magdalene was there, and the whole community was afraid for Jesus' life because the message he was sharing was going to turn upside down some of the things that were going on. The Sadducees and the Pharisees, they were organizations, they were power. Their message was one that they wanted things to stay the same. Jesus came in as an avatar of change. And he came in and he knew what the prophecies said. And he knew he had to raise his vibration, keep his vibration, fulfill the prophecy, fulfill what he had been involved with creating for what this 2,000 years was going to be. And I'm saying this 2,000 years because after 2,000 years, we get into another time period where the work that Jesus built on what went on when Archangel Hilarion was chosen. Jesus was chosen of the time he was there. It means the focal point of that 2,000 years in the Ascended Master terms. And now it's turned into Saint Germain. He is the focal point of this 2,000 years. One of the reasons I mentioned Hilarion, Archangel Hilarion, and leading the fifth ray, which was the 2,000 years before, was he turned up as Paul of Tarsus. So he led the one, but then he came in as an ascended master still to help in the time of Jesus and spread Jesus' word. Saint Germain was actually here at the time of Jesus too. He was actually Joseph. He was actually Jesus' father. So we have an awful lot of help from the higher beings, the ascended masters, the archangels, and it's a process, and that process went with Jesus moving through his experience is that we know more about in the later years of his ministry. We know about some of the events in the early years, then he was not present in that area for a number of years as he learned some of what he needed to learn and also shared in other places. But when Mary Magdalene and the disciples and the other people were there that were part of this group, they were getting the message of unconditional love. And that's what I want to come back to now. And that's what I want to come back to with Mary Magdalene. Sorry if that took a little while to get there, but I think you have to lay the foundation, because if we look at it in a very small way, like we look at when we're on Earth sometimes, it seems like we're looking at what seems to be on the surface and what's all around us. We sometimes miss the larger picture. So what did Mary Magdalene add in picking up Jesus' living testimony that became part of the gospel of the beloved companion? One of the things I've done for 3 years since I ran into this book is I've actually done the 8 couplets that are in the very end of the testimony that she shares. And this is testimony that Jesus gave to her, and they're vibrations. Now, is that a surprise that as vibrational beings, we would be focused on vibrations? Teilhard de Chardin actually said, another French name, I don't know how I did pronouncing, he actually said we're spiritual beings having a human experience, not human beings having a spiritual experience. I said that right. Okay, so what are the 8 couplets? And these are things that Cheryl and I actually did. We were meditating, gosh, first by ourselves and then with the group starting in 2020. And so I'm going to tell you the eight vibrational couplets, and they're all higher vibrations. And if there's one lesson I got from this gospel that I hope some of you would also resonate to, are the eight couplets. As Jesus described it to Mary Magdalene, and Mary Magdalene described it to the disciples, because Mary Magdalene was able to hear this message, and she was able to know what it meant, and she was able to share it, because I think there were two churches. I think there was the inner church, and that was the ones that were listening from their heart. And there was the outer church, and those were the ones listening from the mind. And also paying a lot of attention to wanting Rome out of Judea. You know, so a lot of the people that were around Jesus, they were looking for change because they didn't want the world to continue the way it was. And the Romans were ruling Judea, and it was not a place a lot of people wanted to be. But Mary Magdalene, I think a lot of the women that were listening from their heart, that were listening with their intuition, that were discerning what Jesus was saying. This is what Mary Magdalene was able to discern. The first one is love and compassion. Now, is that a surprise that Jesus, who represents unconditional love, and that's still true to this day, he built on Judaism, and Saint Germain will build on Jesus' unconditional love. But is it a surprise that love and compassion was something that was huge in the material that Jesus shared? No. And that was starting at the bottom of a tree. And as it started at the bottom of the tree, there were a lot of leaves, and it was harder to see what was going on. But as you get higher up the tree, the light comes through more, and you're able to see better. So love and compassion, as much as we know how essential that is, was actually the foundation of the couplets. The next one was wisdom and understanding, a little bit higher up. Each time you go from a lower branch of the tree to a higher branch, at least in the beginning branches, there were challenges from anybody who was trying to step up from the first bough or branch to the second bough. They met things that were less than love. And I'm going to word them as things that were less than the high vibration that's being held in these couplets. So wisdom and understanding. There was a gatekeeper that tried to cause anyone ascending the tree, like Jesus would later ascend. There were challenges, and we as people who are on our spiritual path need to say, no, we're going to stay true to this vibration. So we've done love and compassion and wisdom and understanding. Then there's honor and humility. Again, a gatekeeper who tries to keep people from deciding to pass to the next higher branch. Then there was strength and courage. Again, a gatekeeper trying to keep people and get them off their track. And then there was clarity and truth. We get to that point in the tree, and ascending the tree, ascending vibrationally. That was actually what Cheryl did in 2020. She actually held the vibration of clarity for the year. So when we meditated, she focused on everything, and specifically clarity. And I focused on everything, and specifically truth. The good news about this fifth couplet, this fifth vibrational area that Jesus taught, is that's where the gatekeepers stop. And that's where people no longer, they're up high enough not to be challenged by somebody trying to get them to make choices that aren't the best choices. It then goes to power and healing. And when people come into their own power, they can use that power to do the healing. and then comes into light and goodwill. At this point, we're most of the way up the tree. The light's really coming in there. And it's a powerful time for someone who is ascending up in their vibrations. And the final one is grace and beauty of the Spirit. And when we're in that light, and we're only in that light, that's a time we know that we've achieved something that I don't think we knew exactly what we know we'd achieve until we got there. So the disciples actually had a little bit of a hard time accepting this from her, because it's like, why did Jesus speak to Mary Magdalene? Why didn't they speak to me? Well, they did, but it was heard differently, just like everyone today who hears what I said is going to hear it somewhat differently. And that's good, because it's part of our own journey, part of our own process to work with whatever is offered to us. So so where are we now? Well, I'm going to tell you, and I didn't say this at the beginning, I thought about it, but we are now at the point where Mary Magdalene is becoming really important again. Or this book and all the other material that was coming out would not be coming up. I've heard in some of the Ascended Master texts that Lady Nada is actually Mary Magdalene. Could be someone else. I've heard other stories too. But Lady Nada actually, for years, just sat there and sent unconditional love to people. And she didn't tell anybody she was doing it. She just said unconditional love. Would Jesus have someone like that choose to be a volunteer with him at a time where he was trying to show the world what unconditional love is? It was either Lady Nada or someone else, but it was a volunteer that came in to show the deeper meaning of what was going on. And I believe these messages are being shared now to share the deeper meaning of what's going on. And I think with Mary Magdalene, with whatever higher being came in and served as Mary Magdalene, I think we have a lot to look forward to still from what's going to go on now and in the future. Because Jesus' ministry started around 2000 AD. The one before that was 2,000 years. Right now, we're 2,000 years into Jesus' the period where unconditional love was the focus of the world. And the Ascended Master that came this time to focus on the message is Saint Germain. And he came in for freedom. And that's where people not only have, ascended, but we ascend as a group. So what I'm looking forward to is Saint Germain building on what Jesus did. Saint Germain, remember, was Joseph and Jesus' life. So, if you're going to pick somebody to be with you, you're going to pick somebody that want to do a really good job. Anytime you start any business or anything else, you pick the brightest, you pick the best. For him, it was the highest good. For Saint Germain, it's the highest good. So Cheryl sang, and this is why I asked her to sing it, that all beings be free. So isn't it time that all beings are free? And don't we owe a thank you, as you say, I always say thank you, to Jesus and to Mary Magdalene and all the loving higher beings that chose to come in at that time and make a difference in that world. And we have so much help, and there's every reason to expect that what's going on at this time is going to build on the profound messages of Jesus that Mary Magdalene shared. And I thank you for being here today and sharing with me.